Hello, class. We're starting week 6 now. We get to delve into the exciting time of the Protestant Reformation, which in some ways was the culmination of the movements that were well underway in the Renaissance. The Reformation was kind of like the Renaissance on steroids, you might say. So we're going to discuss that and the implications for how to deal with the Reformed tradition this week. But I wanted to close out our discussion last week. We were talking a little bit about the issue of Isaiah 7:14 and how we understand Isaiah 7:14 in the context of Christian scripture. You know, when Matthew 1:23 cites Isaiah 7:14 as being fulfilled in the virgin birth of Jesus, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean that Isaiah 7:14 is a literal prophecy of the virgin birth of Jesus, written some 7 centuries or so before the fact? Or is there something going on else there? Okay, and this question, of course, has come up, has been with the church always, but really came up in a big way, beginning really in Jerome's own translation when he was wrestling over whether to translate the word Alma, the Hebrew word, as virgin or young women. This is one case where he bowed to tradition and translated it Virgo, but in reality, it was the word Betula was being used. That would be the word for virgin. The word Alma is probably best translated young woman, which in all likelihood no more means virgin than the phrase young woman does in English. Okay, so that was the first time in which there was the sign of a controversy over that verse. And of course, in the Renaissance period, where many of the scholars were the Catholic scholars were trying to really put Jerome's ideas of biblical interpretation into action, this was bound to be something that would be controversial again, because not only do you have the issue of virgin versus young woman, but you also have the literary context of Isaiah 7 itself. In context, really, it's an oracle given to King Ahaz, specifically about the problems that he's undergoing with the Syro-Ephraimite alliance, and fearing that his southern kingdom of Judah is facing a military threat. And of course, the entire oracle is built around offering him a word of hope around that predicament, and how's he going to get out of that. And we do see signs, therefore, later in the book that the child could either refer to Isaiah's own son, as you would think, given what the material says in Isaiah 8, where it does talk about the birth of Isaiah's son, but it also could refer to the baby born in Isaiah 9, which really does seem to be Ahaz's own son, which would have been Hezekiah. And of course, Hezekiah did lead Israel out through this particular military threat. And so, and an even greater threat, in fact, when he's confronted with a much larger invasion from Assyria to the north in his own time period. And of course, there's a detailed account of this in Isaiah chapter 36, 37, 38, and 39, as well as a parallel account in the second book of Kings. So in this period, we must now say that this actually had a literary context that was different than Jesus. And also you can see that even the time period is a little bit off, because when you read the Isaianic oracle, when it talks about the baby that's to be born, it talks about, his own growth period of time. So but before he eats curds and honey and knows to choose the good from the evil. So in other words, you're talking about the baby's own period of time from birth to the age of reason. We're talking about something definitely in the timeline of the prophet Isaiah and the life of King Ahaz. So here's the question then: how can this apply to Jesus 700 some years later? And are we not tearing this verse out of context? And I think one of you rather brilliantly posted, well, this could be a typology, some kind of type being used here, where this baby is in some way a type of the baby given in Jesus' own nativity in the New Testament. So one baby might be a type of the other baby. And sure enough, I think that that's right. And I think we could even draw that out a little further by talking about Augustine's theory of signs. If you remember Augustine's theory of signs, back in his book on Christian doctrine, De Doctrina Christiana, you will remember that Augustine says that there are signs and there are things signified. And in fact, the signs point to things that they signify, that the words themselves in the prophecy of Isaiah are themselves the signs, and they point to things, that is the signatum, the things that are signified. And of course, the interesting twist is that Isaiah, excuse me, Augustine sees these things signed, these signified, these signata, as themselves being signs for something else. So in other words, when the words of the Isaianic prophecy point to a baby born in the 7th or 8th century BC, that baby himself is a sign of a much larger reality. This baby, this miracle baby, is, a saving act committed by God in the 8th century BC when Israel, that is the southern kingdom of Judah in this instance, was facing a great threat. And so you're going to see something analogous in the time of the New Testament when the people of God are also facing a tremendous military and existential threat, this time by the Roman Empire, which is in effect now governing in cahoots with King Herod, who we know from the book of Matthew is also an evil monarch bent on death and destruction and is not faithful to God. And so we're going to look for a much greater act of salvation from that particular existential situation. And so you can see in that way how, though the baby, in a purely literal way doesn't correspond all that closely to Jesus, because, we would like to think that Jesus he's not recorded as eating curds and honey, for instance. He's not recorded as having, reached an age where he can choose the good and reject the evil, right? We've assumed he's already had that knowledge, being God incarnate. But nevertheless, there are a lot of similarities. And so there's a typological connection. There's a relationship, better put, of sign and signata, so that the sign of the words of Isaiah point to a thing, which is the baby born, probably Hezekiah. Hezekiah himself is a sign for Jesus, because they're both kings. They both stand in the heir apparent of they're both heir apparents of King David, and they both, in their own respective ways, deliver people from a military catastrophe, okay, and enact a kind of salvation, okay, where one salvation is a sign for the latter and more great salvation. The salvation of Hezekiah is a sign of the greater salvation in the New Testament under Jesus Christ, okay? So that's, I think, one way we could kind of put those together, and that really, I think, solves a lot of the problems of modern sort of critical scholars complaining that we are wresting this verse out of context, that we're wresting Isaiah out of context, that we're wresting Isaiah 7:14 out of context, where it means one thing and now we're making it point to something else. Well, in fact, all words have an inherent dynamism associated with them, that all things that the words refer to can themselves be signs of greater realities. And the underlying problem that modern scholarship has in some ways is that they don't really see the words as being signs of anything. The words are just words. They don't really point in any necessarily a clear way to history. And so in some ways, the historical connection between the words and the things that the word signifies is lost. Okay? So at any rate, that's how I think we want to start off this week. I do ask a question here above on the Protestant Reformation, so let's have a good discussion on that this week. We do need to do a midterm sooner or later. I don't know. Do you want to do that this week or next week? I will leave that up to you. Okay, so I need to make some adjustments to that test. I think it was a little too difficult from previous years. So what I would like to do is have another day or two to fix that test a little bit, and then we can we can have you take it. And perhaps you would like another review session before then. I don't know when I will be able to do that, though, because I may be traveling a little bit toward the end of this week. So at any rate, please remember, I do always grade these exams on a curve. So if it's a multiple choice, so if you miss a few of them, don't worry about it, because odds are other people in the course are missing them too. So it will be okay. Okay. So I will see you on the discussion board this week.